Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gord. Average Folks in the Afterlife, number 55. Today we'll be continuing on with Paul Elder's marvelous Eyes of an Angel. And the more I get into this, the more I realize, and I should say remember, because I did read this book about 8 to 10 years ago. What a marvelous introduction to out-of-body experience and the various planes and what you can do there. This is, there's other good books too, but this is, for me, this is becoming a forgotten, neglected classic. Paul Elder, Eyes of an Angel. So, he's currently at the Monroe Institute in Virginia, in the middle of a session or series of sessions, I should say. And let me just plunge right into the middle. We'll get to the juicy bit really quickly. In the dim glow of a small yard light, my attention was drawn to a gleaming object lying in the thick, dew-covered grass below. He says he was becoming aware of this as he was trying to get a grip on a vibration in the pit of his stomach, which was disturbing him, and then he suddenly found himself floating in strange surroundings above the ground. It appeared to be a polished nickel-plated handgun like some of the semi-automatic pistols I'd seen on television. I was puzzled. I hadn't the foggiest idea where I was or why. As I floated in place, trying to figure out what was happening, I felt another surge of energy, and a moment later, I was looking down on a pair of hands over a wash basin. Beside the basin, an old hand-operated water pump was bolted to the countertop. Below me, someone reached out, pumped water into the basin, and began to wash his hands. To my surprise, the wash water quickly turned red. It looked like blood. My thoughts were all questions. Whose hands were these? My hands? Didn't feel like they were. Whose blood? Had I killed someone? Had somebody killed me? The scene faded, and next I found myself in a long frame wooden building, looking down at a dirty wooden floor. Feeling suddenly fatigued, my mind reeled at the realization that I was now inside a physical body racked with pain. At the front of the building, a uniformed army officer sat at a wide, official-looking desk. Pacing in front of the desk was another soldier in combat gear. He was screaming at me in a Slavic tongue. I couldn't understand a word he was saying, but somehow I knew that this man was going to kill me. Almost faint from prolonged, intense pain, I couldn't bear much more. I just wanted him to get it over with. A moment later, I was again floating in the night air, looking down on the tall green grass. I had a startling realization. This was indeed another place and time. It was a scene from a previous life. As if in answer to an unstated question, I heard the words 1944 in my mind. I understood. This was the year of my previous death. The next thing I knew, I was back in my body in the present world. Pulling off my headphones, I drew a deep breath and stretched out on the bed. There was a lot to think about. No longer did I doubt the possibility of past lives. Reincarnation was a reality. You notice how he just has a direct knowing that that's a past life. He doesn't have to be told. He doesn't have to analyze anything. He just knows. This is important in our inner journeys as we move beyond the brain and its capacity for intellectual rationalization and analysis. You need to move, or you will find that you will need to move to intuition, direct knowing without interruption of the analytical intellect that will give you 15 reasons to doubt what you just experienced, if not 20. At his next experience, he has, as he says, he pondered the recent changes to his worldview. I began to notice subtle vibration exerting pressure against the inside of my forehead. A new sensation, it seemed to be slowly but steadily increasing in intensity. With the exception of the vibration, I felt a lot like the beginning of a sinus headache. Deciding to let the process unfold, I relaxed and waited for what would follow. The pressure continued to build, growing increasingly uncomfortable. When I began to wonder if I could stand much more, it abruptly released. It was as if a jet of air had puffed through the center of my forehead, creating an aperture that I could see through. At first only a small speck of light appeared, but the vibration inside my head began to surge, and, ever so slowly, the opening grew wider. Soon it seemed like I was peering through a long dark tunnel. I wondered if this vision was what some referred to as the third eye, or was it instead the type of tunnel people described in a near-death experience? Then I began to worry. Why was this happening? Could I be dying? No sooner had this thought crossed my mind than a feeling of peace and well-being began to flow through me. The exquisite vibration, which earlier seemed to be confined to my head, now surged through my entire body, intensifying as it spread. It wasn't long before my every molecule felt as if it were being gently massaged from within. My every molecule massaged from within. As I drew nearer to what appeared to be the end of the tunnel, my anticipation became almost unbearable. I was shaking like a leaf in the breeze. Softly, like sunlight filtering through the morning mist, a wonderful golden light began pouring into the opening, enveloping me, bathing me. Overwhelmed by powerful emotions, I found myself irresistibly drawn into the light. There was nothing I had ever wanted more. For several moments I floated in place, soothed by the vibrating glow. Whatever this light was, it filled me with the warmth of complete love and acceptance. I would have been willing to stay forever, but as the minutes passed, I felt a compulsion to move on. I thought I heard someone calling my name and I couldn't resist. Someone was waiting for me to move through the brightness to the other side. I had to know what the next step would bring. With increasing excitement, I moved through the opening. The golden light faded, and before me appeared the most beautiful vista I've ever seen. Billowing white clouds floated through a pristine sky. In the distance, my eyes were drawn to a horizon of beautiful snow-covered mountain peaks. Spilling out of the mountains, a forest of magnificent blue-green trees cascaded down the slopes into the valley below. Alive with every imaginable color and variety of flower, the dazzling grass-covered hills swept up from the valley and across a small clearing to a stand of vibrant fruit trees beside me. The smell of the blossoms, flowers, and grass was intoxicating. If this isn't heaven, I mused, then it sure ought to be. While soaking in the natural beauty of my surroundings, I began to have the feeling that someone was watching me. Cautiously turning to my left, I was surprised by the presence of two men a few feet away. Dressed in tan, monk-like robes, warm smiles spread across their faces as they bowed their heads in greeting. My mind raced with excitement. Who were they? They looked so familiar. I was certain I'd seen them before. As if in answer to my thoughts, the man on the left reached up and pulled back his hood. Deeply tanned with a short black wavy hair and a full beard, his dark, beautiful eyes burned their way into my soul. Appearing to be around 35, he had a trim but stocky physique. With eyes twinkling, he greeted me. "Hi, Paul. My name is Melder." The other man, a bit younger and slimmer, was clean-shaven with medium brown hair and blue eyes. Smiling warmly, he just said hi. I was stunned. They had actually spoken to me. It was the same as speaking with any person in the physical world. I clearly and distinctly heard their voices, but how could they know my name? For some reason, I thought communicating with a spirit would be different than this. I'm sure that my thoughts must have been as plain as the confusion written all over my face. Melder's expression took on a look you might expect from an amused, loving parent answering a child's question. "We have known you through eternity, in many, many lifetimes. It's taken a while in this incarnation, but we are delighted that we have finally been able to make you aware of our presence." We have known you through many, many lifetimes. I did write about that kind of guide myself in More Adventures in Eternity, and perhaps we'll make a little comparison later. With that, he smiled, and a beautiful golden aura began to form around the two beings. Growing in brightness, enveloped both of them, slowly radiating towards me. Cautiously, I pulled back, bracing myself as the wave of energy hit. Within seconds, my body began to vibrate with the purest feeling of love and acceptance I'd ever experienced. At first, it practically took my breath away, but when I felt the love and trust it engendered, I closed my eyes, allowing the wonderful energy to envelop me. How long I basked in the aura, I didn't know, but at some point I began to feel the embrace of Meldor's mind within my own. I could feel his vibration and hear his thoughts. We are pleased that we have been able to spend this short time with you, but it is now time for us to withdraw. In a moment, your consciousness will be drawn back to your body and you will not be able to see us. But please know that we are always available to me. To you. You need only to search within. Call us and we will be with you. The love and appreciation that I felt for these two beings seemed unlimited. My heart ached. I wanted them to know this, but I was speechless. I managed to express only two simple words. Thank you. Previously, I'd read about spiritual helpers and guides. I'd never given the idea much consideration, but now I somehow knew that these two beings were my spirit guides. I sounded his name over and over in my mind. Meldor, what a strange name. Makes me think of that Mulder character in the TV show. I thought my thoughts then turned to the other spirit, but it dawned on me he hadn't told his name. The remainder of the day was a washout. I couldn't chase the experience from my mind. For some reason, an uncomfortable pressure formed in the center of my chest. I wondered if it was my heart reminding me that it still required more time to heal. So he finishes at Monroe, goes back home, and after a couple of weeks, this happens. A couple of weeks after arriving home, the end of a long business day found me sitting in my office chair, daydreaming about the encounter with my guides. Wondering if I would ever see them again, I lolled deep in thought when the abrupt sound of a distinct male voice jolted me to attention. "We are here!" It startled me as much as I bolted upright. At first I thought there had to be someone else in the room. What else could the voice have come from? And I glanced around, but I knew there was no one else in the building. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like the voice had been inside my head. It sounded like the same voice I heard a few weeks earlier at the Institute. It had to be Melder. Sitting back in my chair, I calmed my mind and moved into a meditative state. Within a few minutes, I was hovering at the edge of sleep when a sudden chill went up my spine. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Fighting every impulse to jump up and run, I refused to move. Moments later, a warming vibration began to move down the back of my skull to the bottom of my spine, and then back up to the top of my head. With it, a wave of heat spread throughout my upper body. Everything began to spin. I felt like I was about to faint, and then I heard the voice again. "We're sorry we startled you." Melder's words were quiet and soothing. "We have been working with your internal energies to help you become more receptive to our communication. We wanted you to know that it's not necessary for you to be separated from your body in order to be aware of our presence." Breathing in deeply, my body shuddered as I exhaled. I had a vague sense of slipping into the chair, my mind riveted to the new impressions inside my head. It felt different than anything I'd experienced. I wondered if the spirits were able to hear my thoughts. Melder's clear and measured response came quickly. "Yes, we can hear your thoughts and your spoken words, but only if you have directed them to our attention. If you call us, we hear you." And yes, that is true. Call to your guides and they will hear you. I tried to remain calm. There were so many things I wanted to know. I began, I think I've seen you in my dreams. You seem familiar, but I need to know who you are. Are you my guides or guardian angels? I heard a soft chuckle. No, we are not angels in the sense that you have come to understand. We are helpers. We have been with you through many lifetimes in this physical world. We have agreed to assist you in the challenges and goals that you've set for yourself. The circumstances of your early years were tougher than expected. But you have overcome many barriers and now are beginning to remember and reconnect with your true essence. That's what I felt in the early part of my journey, as I sort of discussed in more adventures. Connecting to a deeper sense of myself that had existed all along, that I had forgotten, neglected, etc., etc. But if you've always been with me, I questioned, why haven't I been aware of you before? When you first begin an incarnation as an infant, Melder replied, you are still closely bound to the realms of spirit. As your physical form grows and you become more and more involved in the physical aspects of survival, your connection to the world of spirit begins to fade. Incarnated spirits, for the most part, slowly forget their origin and true identity. The consciousness is of the soul and operating through the human brain, and it can be very slow and dense. Therefore, contact between the helper and the soul is easier when the body is asleep or in an expanded state of awareness. We are able to communicate with you in your dreams and meditative states, sometimes to simply put a thought into your mind. This was also fantastic. I didn't doubt his words, but being the type of person I am, I needed proof. Melder was way ahead of me. With a small titter, he admonished me. Okay, Missouri. Instantly, I was transported back in time, driving my car through British Columbia. It was a long haul through the mountains, and I was having difficulty staying awake. At some point, I had fallen asleep while approaching a long curve in the road. All of a sudden, I became aware of a voice screaming in my ears, Paul, wake up! Jerking back to consciousness, I found to my horror that I was in the wrong lane, heading straight for a truck coming from the opposite direction. Jamming on the brakes, I cranked the steering wheel. With tires screeching, the cars lurched across the center line, missing the truck by inches. The mental imagery came to an end, and I recalled the entire incident. I remembered having to pull over to the side of the road while I waited for my heart to crawl back into my chest. That was you, I asked. The question needed no answer. Before I could refocus my thoughts, another memory started playing out in my mind. It was the terrible car accident I had been in years before. I was back in the car as it careened down the ditch, crashed, and spun wildly into the air. Everything went black just as it had during the crash. The next scene, however, was not part of that memory. It was something new. As I lay unconscious in the frozen field, I became aware of someone calling my name, urging me awake, telling me to get up. I had to get up or I would die. Only vaguely aware of my body, I drifted in and out of consciousness. Then, out of the darkness, a luminous mist began to appear beside me. It continued to expand and grow in intensity until it surrounded me. At its center appeared a radiant being. As he loomed over me, I was enveloped by an overwhelming feeling of love and compassion. The glowing form bent down and, putting his arms around me, drew me close. I could feel the warmth flowing from his body into mine. I thought that I must be dreaming or hallucinating, but it didn't matter. Completely at peace, I slipped again into the blackness of sleep. The next thing I knew, I heard my name called again, this time more forcefully. Now, Paul, you must get up now. Jerking awake, I sat up in the field. The being was gone. I was alone. In the distance, I could see headlights approaching. Although it had to be more than 200 feet to the road, I had to get someone's attention. Desperately, I began crawling, but it soon became apparent that I wouldn't get there in time. Struggling to my feet, I ran for all I was worth. Just as the car was approaching, I lurched to the end of the road, frantically waving my arms. The car careened by, but then with a spray of gravel, it came to a skidding stop. The driver put the car into reverse and backed to where I stood. The passenger side window rolled down, and someone exclaimed, Jesus, take it easy, man. We'll go and get help. With that, the engine roared, gravel flew from the tires, and the car sped off into the night. The scene faded, and a moment later I was back in my office chair. I was stunned. The episode had never been part of my conscious memory. All of those years I had no idea that a spirit had come to help me in that frozen field. As feelings of love and appreciation flooded through me, Melder continued his narrative. We would never interfere with your intentions or free will, but there have been times when we have interceded to prevent a transition before your intended time. There have been many instances in your life when we have been in direct contact with you in times of trauma or at critical points in your development. The two examples you have been shown are the extreme. Normally, we merely try to provide a subtle guidance to nudge you along, to help you achieve your goals. I was deep in thought. What an opportunity! A new question occurred to me. Meldor, you say that you have been with me through many lives. A few days ago at the Monroe Institute, as I'm sure you're aware, I had an experience that seemed to be from another lifetime. It left me with a lot of confusion and a number of questions. Was that a past life? Did I kill someone, or was it me that was killed? Yes, it's unfortunate that that experience was cut short, Melder replied. As you now understand, you have had many incarnations. The one you experienced was the most recent life in your linear concept of time. We know that having the experience interrupted left you in confusion. If you wish, we can assist you with a continued look at that short life. Although a bit apprehensive, I certainly wanted to unravel the mystery. Yes, please, I'd like to know. Immediately, I began to feel a slight pressure at the center of my forehead. There followed a surge in vibration and a blur of colors. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air, racked with pain. The assault on my senses was unbearable. A moan escaped from my throat. My head hung down, my chin resting on my chest. Opening my eyes, I realized it was nighttime. I was outdoors in the cool air. Looking down at my body, a wave of shock spread through me. I was naked and filthy, my chest blackened and covered with blood. On my inner left thigh, a large gaping wound was crusted over with blood, trailing down my leg to a pool of scarlet beneath my feet. The entire left side of my body felt like it had been crushed. An incessant pain throbbed through the left side of my chest, and I was having difficulty breathing. The salty taste of blood filled my mouth. I knew there must have been a hole in my lung. I could hear bubbles as I drew each painful breath. My hands had been tied behind my back and bound tightly to a pole. Overhead, a dim yard light shone from the top of the pole, and about 15 feet in front of me stood a gable-ended building covered with tin. Exhausted and in agony, I couldn't take much more. I knew they were going to kill me. I just wanted them to get it over with. Moments later, two soldiers stepped out of the building, slamming the door behind them. One of them, a man I'd seen in my first vision in this life review, strode up to me, raised his pistol to my left temple, and pulled the trigger. In an instant, I found myself floating above my body, which now hung awkwardly from the pole. With a dizzying spin, everything faded to black, and I was back in the quiet of my office. Emotionally drained, I needed time to recover from the intensity of the experience. Melder's voice focused my mind once again. We are pleased that we have had this time to communicate with you, but we must now withdraw our vibration so that your energy may be restored. We are always with you. With that, the vibrations disappeared, and the ringing telephone brought me back to the physical world. It was Candace, wondering when I'd be home for dinner. It was almost 6:30. The encounter had gone on for more than an hour. Lots of interesting stuff here. I mean, really, you could read almost every page. As time wore on, I became more familiar with the feeling and vibration of my spirit guides. Although my life had become extremely busy, I tried to spend at least a few minutes each day communicating or attempting to make contact. Depending on my level of stress and ability to relax, sometimes I felt their presence and sometimes I didn't. One night I woke around 3 a.m., the familiar high-pitched tone in my ears. I knew that if I could keep from falling asleep, it would be a good opportunity to leave my body. Within just a few minutes, my mind calmed and I dropped through the threshold into superconsciousness. Before long, a wave of energy flooded the top of my head and began to radiate throughout my body. Concentrating on the frequency of the vibration, I pushed the energy higher. When every molecule in my body seemed to be buzzing with electricity, I was ready to leave. With just the thought of floating, there came an abrupt surge and I lifted off the bed. Elation momentarily overwhelmed my senses. See that? Excitement does it every time. Stay calm. Stay observant. Stay cool. When I regained control, I had difficulty deciding what to do. Should I fly around the house? Head out into the night sky? Perhaps I could find my way back to the beautiful park where I had met my spirit guides. The thought had hardly registered when I felt a shift, a feeling of movement, and I was standing in a park-like setting. Sensing a familiar presence nearby, I turned in the direction of the vibration and was greeted by 2 smiling faces. "Welcome back. We're glad you could join us." Melder's voice was clear and strong. "We know you have many questions. Reopening awareness to your own spiritual reality can be very exciting. We are pleased to assist you in any possible way. You need only to ask." Reopening awareness to your spiritual reality. Reopening. Not opening, reopening. You shut the door and walked away and then forgot. I wasn't sure that I should be asking. My mind was racing. I wasn't sure what, if anything, I should be asking. Finally, I thought of a good beginning. "Thank you for helping me," I said, and referring to the second guide, I added, "But I don't know your name." "In our plane of energy," he replied, "names are not necessary. Every being has an identifiable and unique vibration. You will know us by our vibration and feeling, but if you feel more comfortable with a name, you may call me Rayon." That looks more like Raylon. "Sometimes," I continued, "when I try to connect with you, I'm only able to feel Melder's vibrations. I can't seem to feel you." "Raylon," Melder injected, "is my assistant. He is what you might call an apprentice, learning to work as a teacher. He has other assignments and is therefore not always able to accompany me." Yes, again, there's always guides in training. I've done that myself a few times. And sometimes they get a little frustrated with me, Sometimes I forget they're there. Then go off and do something and leave them on their own. Oh dear. I'm a terrible teacher. I thought of another question. Sometimes when I'm trying to communicate with you, the volume of information is overwhelming, and yet now I can clearly hear and understand what you're saying. Why does this happen? Melder nodded his head and smiled. Communication in the spiritual realm is more encompassing and proficient than in the physical. Human language concepts are extremely limiting. When the consciousness of your mind is operating in this realm, it is easy for you to assimilate the complexity of the communication. However, when you are back in your body trying to process the information through your physical brain, you may have difficulty remembering or interpreting aspects of the information. The human brain in its present development simply cannot handle the assimilation of so many levels of data. True. You may have noticed this phenomenon in your dream states. While you're engaged in the dream, your mind is operating at its spiritual level. Though everything may seem entirely understandable during dream consciousness, as soon as you awaken and begin to process the data through your physical brain, the details may seem completely nonsensical. To answer your question, we are communicating in this simple manner to enable you to fully process and remember the experience when you're back in your physical body. As you become more adapted to our form of communication, you will find that you are able to assimilate information at more complex levels. It does happen. I've noticed that. I've tried to write about it, but it can be tough. 4 streams of information simultaneous. It's not easy. Easier to experience than to relate, I'll say that. A thought that had been nagging at me ever since my near death several months earlier came to mind. I had heard about near-death experiences where people had gone through a review of their life. I hadn't made it to the point before being brought back from the other side. I'd always wondered what the experience would be like. Reading my thoughts, Melder was way ahead of me. As you're beginning to realize, when each incarnated soul returns to its origin, there is no judgment by any other entity. Each soul making the transition is assisted by loving guides in a review of their immediate past life. Very often, perfected higher beings such as the Christ consciousness, Krishna, Muhammad, or other deities and masters, depending on the individual belief, will be present to offer support and guidance. They do not judge, nor does anyone mete out punishment of any kind. The concept of a judgmental, punishing God is purely dogmatic, a man made construction. God does not punish, God only loves. That's which God are we talking about there? There's lower deities that are quite happy to impersonate the punishing God figure that some religions convey to their followers. They're actors. They're kind of bad actors, really, but especially when you've grown beyond them. That's another thing we'll get to in a few shows after this one. We'll do a couple more on this one. I have a book on I think it's God and the Afterlife, and it's people's visions of God in their NDEs, and there's a lot of them, and it will provoke some fruitful discussion later. We know, he continued, that you have wondered why the experience of a life reviewed, and to further your understanding, we will assist you in this aspect of the higher vibration. Nothing of energy is ever lost. All thoughts, actions, and deeds are retained to provide the basis for assessment and reflection. In a moment, he warned, you may feel a shift in vibration, which is necessary to engage the higher energies that hold the imprint of the life vibration. I felt a burst of energy, a brief motion, and then a montage of images began to play through my mind. Like fanning through the pictures in a photograph album, my life flashed before me. Everything was there: incidents, events, thoughts long forgotten, good experiences, traumatic and uncomfortable experiences, all whirled by in a chronological succession. If at any time I wanted to take a closer look at the particular event, the process would stop, and instantly, like a videotape playing in my mind, I would be immersed in reliving the occasion. I was on an emotional roller coaster, the highs, the lows, the sadness and grief, along with jubilation and happiness, forever imprinted in my mind. I could not be sure of the amount of time the processing took. It could have been a minute or hours, I don't know. I saw why there was no need for someone else to pass judgment on my life. Nothing was lost. I was the only judge necessary, and I would be the harshest critic. I knew when I had failed and when I had succeeded, but there was an unexpected twist. Not only could I relive how I had felt during any particular incident, I could also feel the pain and happiness of others whom I had affected through my words and actions. I could feel again the anger I felt as I lashed out at a playmate in the schoolyard, but I could also feel the pain and injury he felt at the humiliation. The good and the bad all passed before me. I watched the effect that even a small act of kindness could have on others. Something as small as my cheery greeting had lifted someone's spirits, and they in turn felt better about themselves and treated others more kindly. I was astonished at how the lives of so many people could be inadvertently affected by my actions, whether positive or negative. That last bit made me think of that Dylan Thomas poem to his son, where he says, good and bad, two ways of moving about your death. Of course, there's more. Inevitably, the chronology of my life brought me back to the time of my heart attack and near-death experience. I needed to see no more. The images stopped. I felt the love and support in Melder's embrace. I was emotionally drained, and yet at the same time rejuvenated. I had a better understanding of who I was and what I needed to do. Melder's soft voice interrupted my reverie. It's now time to return to the physical vibration. There is much processing that you will need to do, and your energy needs to be restored. We are pleased to have been able to assist you. Well, are we done? Or no, we're not quite done yet. Not for today, anyway. The next section is doing retrievals or soul rescues. Those are the two terms you'll understand already, probably, about that particular activity from other psychics and your own experiences, probably. This is from the Lifelines program at Monroe, where that's pretty much what they teach. let's see. Pretty soon he's back at the park on Focus 27. And the park is a place that's much used to either live in. It's sort of a non-denominational heaven, belief system free, created by souls interested in that particular reality. And a lot of the soul retrieval work winds up going there. I know I've been there many times myself. The iridescent beauty of what I now called the park greeted me with the warmth of a long-lost friend. Melder's powerful presence was pervasive. I could feel his distinct vibration flowing through me. Within moments he was standing beside me, softly touching my shoulder. Hello again. Welcome home. Thank you, I eagerly responded. Melder, this is so incredible. Why can't I come here every day? Actually, you do quite often. Most nights while your physical body sleeps, at some point you travel here in your spirit body to join with those who love you. You come to learn and rejuvenate your energy with the vibration of the all. The all? Yes, the all that is. Many refer to it by various names, but the energy you feel here permeates all things. It is the universal energy of love. Nothing can avoid or escape its power. It is essentially the energy vibration of all souls. Considering the religious concepts that you've been taught, you may think of it as the energy of the Holy Spirit or the essence of God. It's all the same, and it's the source of all that is. Deep within, I felt the truth of Melder's revelations, but I was still puzzled. It's a wonderful feeling, but if I come here every night, why don't I remember it? In fact, why doesn't everyone remember it? Wouldn't the world be a much better place if everyone knew and remembered that is our real home, that this is our real home? If everyone could experience this and remember it, there'd be no wars, there'd be no crime, and no one would hurt another being. Aha. The enthusiasm of the newbies, I tell you. That is true, Melder acknowledged, but if everyone knew and remembered, there would be little reason to incarnate. But if everyone knew and remembered, there would be little reason to incarnate. All of you who have asked me that question, ponder on that. There would be little challenge to the human experience. The challenge and the quest to improve, to overcome, and to remember is what gives real value to the experience. The value and power of human existence is in the experience itself. We all benefit from the lessons and experiences of each soul. We are, in reality, all one. Well, I'm sure you've heard that before. His answer made sense to me, but I struggled with the idea of being all one. I needed more of an explanation. Melder sensed my confusion. To truly experience something, he continued, is the best tool for understanding. Knowing is better than believing. The human mind experiences itself as distinct and separate, but that is an illusion. To fully understand the reality of all as one and the connection of all things to each other is helpful to experience the polarity of separation and connection. Knowing is better than believing. I've said that many times in many different ways. Belief always turns into despair, but knowing cannot turn into not knowing. How much simpler does it get? Belief turns into despair, almost without fail. Might take a year, might take 20 years. Knowing never turns into not knowing. With that, Melder placed his index and middle finger on my forehead. A surge shot through me, and I felt as though I was about to lose consciousness. Where just moments before I felt clear and rational, now I couldn't seem to hold a coherent thought in my mind. I was dizzy. Nothing made sense, and very quickly my entire existence seemed to be closing in on me. As I fought to maintain consciousness, the image of a television screen loomed before me. It was as if my entire view of the universe was from inside a television tube from where I looked out. There was an electronic snap as if someone had shut off the power to the television. The screen to my perception of the world went blank. All that seemed to remain of me was a tiny dot of energy in the center of the screen. A virtual sea of blackness surrounded me. The feeling of isolation and darkness creeping into my spirit was almost too much to bear. I was alone in a universe of emptiness. A profound sadness overcame me. I wanted to cry out in desperation, but even my thoughts had begun to fade. My consciousness, my awareness of self was dying, and I knew that in another moment I would cease to exist. Then everything went black and I was no more. As if from an eternity of sleep, I began to re-emerge from the nothingness. Vestiges of dream images and fleeting thoughts tugged at me like rescuing hands of a loving parent. In a few moments I was again awake, my consciousness fully restored. I was still me, but I felt somehow different, changed in some unfathomable way. I'm not sure how to best describe this, but I was no longer aware of being in any particular form. I felt instead like I was floating, a floating sphere of microscopic particles. I had no idea where I was, but it felt as though I was hovering in outer space. With each passing moment, I felt the power of spiritual energy growing within my form. Even though I was composed of hardly more than a mass of seemingly non-connected particles, I felt more alive and together than I'd ever been. My awareness of self was acute. Somehow every individual particle of my being seemed to contain the totality of my consciousness. As I floated in space, relishing the immensity of the experience, I became aware of a concentrated power approaching me. It was nothing that I could see, but the energy of this presence, whatever it was awesome. Every fragment of my awareness began to shake and then to resonate in harmony with the vibrations of this enormous force. Suddenly, I found myself exploding into the universe. It felt as if the very essence of my spirit was being blown like dust into the far reaches of the cosmos. Expanding and growing in perception, it seemed that I had somehow joined with the energy of every living thing. I felt a baby's cry in the anguish of its mother. I experienced the joy of a puppy as it bounded happily after a child. I felt the power of a whale swimming in the ocean. From the mindless destruction of war and to the purposefulness of a hummingbird in flight, I experienced and became part of everything I touched. It was at the same time an explosion of emotion and a mystical encounter with the love of God. I suddenly understood the perfection of creation. The entire experience was so overwhelming, so illuminating, that I became lost in the beauty and complexity of it all. It began slowly at first, small shifts of consciousness tugging at me, reminding me that I was still attached to a physical body. Tears of gratitude and joy started welling up in my eyes until I could no longer resist the pull of the physical. My heart pounding, I remained in the silence of my room, contemplating the emotions and images newly embedded in my mind. Sitting up, I tried to make notes of the session, but the effort seemed futile. After scratching out a few inadequate phrases, I summarized it with the one word, wow. Yep, cosmic consciousness. Where you lose the body and you lose the emotions and you lose the mind or the brain or whatever you want to call it. And you become this omniscient and, how shall I put it, omnipresent being. The cry of the child, the flight of the hummingbird, the destruction of war, etc., etc. Omniscient, omnipresent. And you can't do anything about it. You just you're aware of it all. And you can shut down that awareness. But it's where you go ultimately when you, as you go through the cycle of incarnations, you wind up there. Not immediately after you pass by any means, but you go through your afterlife as the personality that you are. You go through the various hells, paradises, and heaven worlds that suit your belief systems and your inclinations and your desire to learn, whatever. And your desire to experience joy and pleasure too. But eventually that all falls away, whenever that is, and you go through what he experienced there for however long you feel you need, and then you come back. It's a circle. And up here is omniscience, omnipresence, and down here is entering into incarnation. Down here is kind of being totally into it, and up here is kind of, gee, I've had enough of this shit, and then back up to here with the heaven worlds and whatnot in between. Get it? Okay, back to Paul Elder next time. Such a good book, eh? Farewell, my friends.